In this video, I want to show you how to replace your original mirrors for these power folding tow mirrors. They come with a wide angle view at the bottom, a nice wide surface area here to see out of, and they even extend to let you see around your trailer when you're towing. And as you can see, they have this wire here. We'll have to do some wiring and attach these so that you don't have to fold them yourself when needed. You can just press a button and they will fold right up against the truck. Over here, go ahead and remove the trim piece that covers up two of your mounting bolts. You can just grab it and pull straight out, and you can see there's one of them, and right underneath there's the other one. Now if you wanted to remove the door panel, you can, but you don't have to. You have plenty of room to get in here with a socket and extension and get to your mounting bolt. So grab an 11mm socket, and I like to start at the bottom. That way as the mirror loosens up, it's less likely to pull away and fall off if it has the two top bolts still bolted up. Start over here because this is easiest. We'll go to this one. Slow and steady. Last one, support the mirror because it will want to fall off. Pull it straight out. And there's your old mirror. Now, one thing you'll notice on this power folding mirror is that it comes with these studs that you have to install. Take the threaded area that matches the threads on the mirror. It'll be the thicker threads, and thread them into the mirror on all four mounting points. We'll go ahead and bottom them out. They have a hex cut out here for a 10mm wrench or socket, whatever you want to use. And once these are mounted, only then can this go on the door. Otherwise, obviously, it has nothing to clamp on with. Go ahead and tighten them all up. Okay, and now we have studs for the mirror to mount. So at this point, before I put the mirror on, I would like to run some wiring. And that is because the mirror has a very short wire, and I want this connected to the harness right as it goes into the door. So I actually want to run the harness outside of the door, connect the mirror, put it in, bolt it up, and then readjust the length of my wiring. So to do that, let's put the mirror aside. And this is the harness that the kit will come with. So once you unravel it, you'll see that you have this green connector. This will plug into your switch, which we will mount on the dash later. Don't worry about that yet. Out of that switch will come one larger wire, which then will separate into two smaller ones. These will go one to each mirror. So you'll see that one is longer than the other because the shorter one is meant to go on the driver's side. This is the connector for the mirror. And then the longer one you can route to the passenger side under the dash or wherever you want. The other two wires are going to be your power and ground. So it's a very simple setup. These are very long, and that is because it gives you multiple options. As you can see, these are made to run all the way out to your battery, which is where I'm going to connect them. I might actually ground the negative out directly to the chassis here so I don't have to run two wires all the way to the battery. But basically, you have power and ground, and you have the two mirror connections, and then your switch. Super simple setup. And what I want to start with is running the power wire to the battery because I want to work my way from the front under the hood into the dash and out to the doors. So running this harness under the dash, it is best to find a rubber grommet. Right there is a rubber grommet that we can use. It looks like someone has already added some accessory aftermarket custom wiring here. Up here, you'll notice that there's actually another hole that someone drilled, and I'm only showing you this because I want to show you what not to do. That is a wide open hole going into your engine bay. They have drilled right through the firewall and right through this insulation. And now, well, you just, like I said, have a wide open hole. That is not what you want to do. You will get airflow through there, moisture, water, debris, and also this is your firewall. This is meant to protect you in case of a fire. You want it one solid piece. These rubber grommets are fireproof and fire resistant. So I'm going to choose to run my wire through here because that is the safe and the correct way to do it. Now, whether you want to run it into this harness or outside of it is your decision. I'm going to run it outside of it because I don't want to deal with this. These are usually very tightly wrapped, so poking a small hole in here and feeding one wire through will be just fine, and it will be sealed up nicely. If you wanted to, you could put some RTV or silicone paste on it to help it seal up. So let's find the location of this from the outside in the engine bay. That way we know where to reach once we poke our wire through. Most likely my negative is going to round out here. You can run both wires through this, but that's not necessary if you have plenty of grounding options over here. Looking in the engine bay next to the master cylinder, you can see that right there is the hole that someone drilled straight through the firewall. So this is the example that I showed you not to do. And then if you look straight down, you'll see that rubber grommet with the two wires coming out of it. Those are the wires that I pointed to. It's actually somewhat easy to reach, very difficult to see once I get my hand in there, so that's why I'm showing you now. But that's what I'm aiming for. I'm going to show you how to push the wire through, and I'll grab onto it from this side, pull it through, and connect it to our battery. Because there are already wires going through here, I'm going to choose to go through the same hole that someone else has made here. It'll be the easiest. If not, you can just grab a pick, a screwdriver, something small, poke a hole through, the smallest hole you possibly can poke. That way it doesn't rip this whole boot off, and then just run your wire through it. Again, I have this one to follow, so there you go, my wire's through. Now let's pull it through the other side, and don't pull it all through, only pull through how much you need, because you would rather have it hang around in here, then you can tie it up to something, as opposed to hanging in the engine bay where it could get melted, caught by anything, or just be in your way in general. Here, you can easily tie it out of the way. There's our wire right there. I'm going to grab onto it and pull it up out of the way. And when I pull it, I'm going to make sure that I make it follow the line of the fender here so that it's not in the way of the engine. Anything hot, I want it out of the way, up against the fender. We'll make sure we tuck it behind some plastic pieces if we can. You'll notice my battery's missing. You do not have to remove the battery or anything to even disconnect it for this procedure. It's missing for a different reason. It's charging right now. I'll put it in as soon as we're ready to connect so we can also test the functionality of the mirrors. Like I said, I'm going to run it down underneath all this and make sure that it's out of the way of anything that gets hot or anything that it could get caught on. Your kit should have come with 2 ring connectors like this. Basically, you put the wire in here, you crimp it. That allows you to bolt it onto this battery terminal. Again, pretend that this is connected. So to put on this ring connector, we're going to get the wire strippers here and remove the outside sheathing of the wire. After you've done that, go ahead and give this a couple twists. And I like to fold it over just like this so that it gives a larger surface area for the connector to clamp onto. Now, grab your connector, and I'm actually going to put some silicone paste inside of it before I put it in and crimp it. That will make sure that no corrosion will build up there in the future. Silicone paste is also dielectric grease, so it works for electrical connectors. Slide this in. Obviously, I'm going to remove the excess after it's crimped. A lot of it will squeeze out. And now you want to get your crimpers. I'm crimping a blue connector. It's nice that this is all color coded. So go ahead and crimp it down as tight as you can. All the way. Release it. Always double check your crimp to make sure it's good by giving it a little tug. That's perfect. Remove any excess dielectric grease. Now our connection is protected and will be corrosion free for a long time. Loosen up the 10mm nut on your battery terminal. And then what I'm going to do is put this connector right on top. And if you have multiple, the best way to do this is to start with the largest wire or the biggest power drawing connection and work your way up to the smallest one. So you'll see that 4 of them will be stacked here. This is going to be your main power wire. Obviously, this is the terminal. Then you have this one, which goes down there to the engine, but it is a very thick gauge wire, so it's important, draws a lot of power. Then you have this one, which has the largest, thickest wire of all of them. This is for some fog lights that someone has wired in. Then you have this one, which is smaller, an alarm system. And lastly, we have ours, which is the thinnest, smallest gauge wire for our mirrors. Make sure all the connections are lined up correctly and cleaned. That way they make a good contact with the battery terminal. And tighten this up. Obviously this will be a little bit easier if your battery post is connected because this won't move around, but there you have it. This is all connected. I ran this wire for our mirrors in with the wire loom for this one. That way it can stay nice and protected. Someone has already put this on here before, so I used it, or reused it I should say, ran our wires through there. Over here I still have a bunch of extra wire, so when I go inside the cab I'm going to pull it in there so that it doesn't hang out over here. I'd rather, like I said, have it in there where I can tie it out of the way. grab onto your excess wire, just pull it through. Now I don't want to make it tight. I don't want to put any tension on it. Right here it wants to stop. I'm going to go double check under the hood to make sure it's not too tight, and then we'll continue. My next step is going to be finding a mounting location for the switch. And I want to do that next before I do any more wiring, because I want to route the wire to where it's going to live, basically. I want to put my switch over here. This is just a hollow panel behind it. If we pop the headlight switch out, you'll notice that there's nothing here. We can safely cut, and you won't be using this all the time, so having it a little bit out of your way is not a big deal. And if anything, it will be preferable because it's not going to be in your way. You're not going to hit it by accident. So I choose to put it here. Obviously, we're going to have to cut a hole in the dash and make the switch fit. This is what the switch looks like, so we're not going to have to cut a very large hole. And if your truck happens to have these blank plates that cover up potential switches for higher up trims or different options, then you could just pop one of those out and this should slide right in. Unfortunately, ours doesn't have that, so we'll have to make our own. But what I'm thinking is putting it right here. The wire will stick straight out the back, and this will basically be flush here with the panel, and you can easily access it. It'll be right next to your light switch here. If you want, again, you could put it anywhere else. This is just where I prefer to put it. In order for us to get better access behind this panel, what I want to do is pop the headlight switch out. I'm using a plastic trim panel remover. That way I don't break or scratch anything up. Okay, pop the headlight switch out. You don't have to disconnect it. You can just set it aside over here. There's plenty of slack in the wires. And if you look behind it, you'll see that it's all empty. There's nothing there. We don't have to worry about anything when drilling a hole in here. I took a little piece of cardboard, took the switch, and cut myself a nice cutout of how the switch is going to mount. That way I can transfer that mark onto here, cut it out, and make it look good. Obviously the switch size is going to be a little bit larger than the hole itself, so that helps if you have a little imperfection, but obviously try to get it as close as possible. I want my switch to be mounted right about here, and I want to offset it so that it sits between these two switches. That way the wires don't potentially interfere. So I'm going to take a dry erase marker. I'm using that because I want it to be erasable if needed. I can just use some rubbing alcohol and it'll come right off. Mark the hole and try to go smaller than it will actually need to be, because you can always make it bigger and cut more out. But if you cut too much, well, you end up with a big hole that you can't cover. You can cut it with anything you want. I have this little cutting torch here, which is basically just going to melt through the plastic. So you do you. You can drill a hole, cut it with manual saw, whatever works for you. Well, it's not the prettiest, but when you put the switch in, which, by the way, fits, well, a lot of it gets covered up. You could also obviously sand things down and make it nice and maybe put a little trim piece around it, but the switch stays in there, so that's important. That's what matters to me. At this point, with the switch in here, I'm gonna run this wire down through underneath. It's wide open, there's no panel covering, and I'm gonna plug it in here. Then I'm gonna start tucking up the harness in there and running the wire for the driver's side door. When you run it here, make sure it's not in the way of the parking brake lever, because you don't want it to get pinched in there. Go ahead and connect it. Just as a recap, I'm going to show you how to crimp the end of this wire correctly so that you can have a good connection. Strip off the end of the wire, give it a little twist, and fold it in half. This being on the interior, you don't really have to put silicone paste here, but I like to do it just for good practice. So I'm going to crimp it down just like I did the other one. Try to center up the wire, make sure it's not poking out too far or not enough, and then make sure the crimpers are right on the edge where the wire is. Then go ahead and crimp it down. There it is. Give it a tug. Perfect. Now as for grounding this, I'm going to unbolt this OBD2 connector here, and I'm going to basically bolt up the wire on this screw over here, And I chose this because this is the dash support frame and it is grounded to the vehicle. So what I'm going to do with it unbolted, I'm going to pull it down a little bit. I know you can't see it very well, but I'm going to slide this wire in between the OBD2 connector and the dash support, then put the bolt through, and everything will clamp down and make a good connection there. Make sure it's nice and snug. That's secured, and then we'll just tuck up all of our wire. Now, I could have cut them short, but I chose not to, just in case this needs to be dismounted, moved, or for any reason people will need the extra wire. So I just left it here, and I'm going to use a wire tie. I wrapped the extra wire around itself, and then I'm just going to wrap the harness here so that it can stay out of the way. Cut off the extra wire tie, and there we go. The wires are tucked up out of the way. So now, technically, our system should have power. And now we're left with two wires. This one that goes to the passenger side mirror, we'll route that under the dash in a minute. And this one, which is shorter and goes to the driver's side. So let's get this into the door. At this point, we have multiple options. What I'm going to show you is the way I'm going to do it. That does not mean this is how you have to do it. You can do it your own way, you can route it differently. This is just the simplest yet most efficient idea that I came up with. So one way that you could do it is run it through the harness, the door harness here. Now this would be the most complicated way to do it. Typically it wouldn't, but in this situation it is, because this harness doesn't have wires that run into the cab directly. They actually disconnect right here. So you can flip this switch down, which is very convenient for if you have to remove your door. However, this does not allow for any extra connections. So what you have to do is you would have to drill a hole in here, then run the wire outside of this connector, and then poke a hole in the boot, and then run it in through the door and up and out. So that isn't really my preferred choice. That's not what I'm going to do. But because these are just some small wires, I came up with a different solution. So I'm going to plug this back in. If you look in this area, you'll notice there's a rubber plug here. And then if you look over there, there's a rubber plug right in there. So I think you kind of get where I'm hinting. I'm going to run the wire from there to here. And the reason that this is acceptable is because if I leave enough wire out and make sure it doesn't get pinched anywhere, it will not affect the operation of it. You want to leave enough wire for when the door opens, and you want to make sure that when it closes, it doesn't get pinched anywhere, which it won't if we do it correctly. So let's go ahead and take this rubber plug off. And I'm going to take out this piece here just so we can get a better view of what's happening. And at the same time, I also want to remove this, but we'll do that in a second. Let's start over here. On this, you can just pull out. It has 4 push clips that hold it in. Take that out of there, and you can see the larger plug. Remove that. And to remove this piece, since this is open, I can just go ahead and push it from the back side, take the door seal off, and there you go. Now we have plenty of access to run our wire in and through this opening, which goes all the way through, so it'll be very easy. In here, you can see our wiring as well as the switch, and this is the wire for the driver's side. So before I tuck it in there and tie it up anywhere, I'm going to run it up and through this opening. I have a couple of these wire ties that I'm going to feed through this opening, and they'll come out the other end. There it is, I can see it back there. What this is going to do is it's going to allow me to tie the wire onto this end and then pull it straight through. It's going to be a little tight in here, but definitely doable. That's tied over here, and now we can just go ahead and pull it straight through. There it is. Now just make sure it doesn't get hung up on anything, feed it through, undo your wire tie if you used it or whatever you used. Now, I don't want to leave it like this, obviously. I need to put the rubber boot back on, and I don't want to squeeze this wire on the side of the rubber boot. I'm actually going to poke a hole in it, feed this through. Here's the grommet. I took a little razor blade, made a cut in it, and now we can feed our wire through the grommet, through the back side of it, If the hole isn't big enough, I'll make it bigger, but I would rather have it too small and have to force the head of the wire through than have it be too big and then it doesn't seal up. All right, push it through all the way. There we go. This slides nice and easy now. Slide it all the way back. I'm going to give myself some extra wire at this point. I can always push it back in, but this part is done. At this point, I want to get it through the smaller grommet, put it out and through the door. Then we can attach the mirror and plug it in. Then we'll take care of the rest. Okay, I cut up the small grommet. This one, remember, goes in this way, so you have to put it in backwards compared to the larger one. All right, send this one through. Poke it through the door. Attach it. When the harness comes out, it'll come out through this larger opening, the round one. You have to put it in through the square one because that's where the wire for the mirror goes. This will not be able to be used for that. So slide it down and through, just like this. Now let's connect the mirror. Connect the connector. There we go, that clicked in. A little bit difficult to do one-handed. Now I'm gonna pull the wire out through the other side a little bit, not a lot, and then tuck the rest down and into the door, as well as this unit here. Slide the mirror in. There we go, that's lined up. Start your mounting nuts on. You'll notice the mirror gets pulled in. That's exactly what you want. You want it to seat and squish the seal up against the door. Last one. This is the tricky one. At this point, I'd like to test it out before I go any further. That way I make sure that all my wiring is good, everything works. It is grounded, it has power. All you have to do is hit the switch and it should fold. All right, click the button. At this point, we need to deal with all of this extra wiring, and because there's nothing going on here, what I'm going to do is wrap it up nicely, wire tie it, and tuck it up in here before I put this panel back on. All right, there we have it. There's plenty of slack everywhere. At this point, let's put some of these panels back, get the weather seal out of the way, line this one up, press it in. You can put this right back. Make sure it lines up, otherwise you'll have water leaking inside your cab. That would not be good. Over here, go ahead and put on this trim piece. Put back these two grommets as well. Don't forget about this piece that goes right here. Line up all the push clips, just press it right in. Now I won't show you the process of mounting the passenger side mirror because it's the same exact thing as this. Take out the trim piece, the bolts, remove the old mirror, put the new mirror on, run the wire the same exact way. But I will show you once it's done where I ran the wire and how it looks. Oh, and I almost forgot. Go ahead and put this back on. So I installed the other side mirror as well. I ran the wire up along above the steering shaft over there. It's hard to show you. There it is right there. And it goes down underneath the heater controls there, runs over to the other side. Over here, it comes out that way, follows the wiring harness, and then goes up into the A-pillar, runs up, out through the grommet, into the grommet, and onto the mirror.